The Bear Berbils are the first friends on the Thundercats friends list for episode 3, and also the Thundertank, which is also the first vehicle on the list. So the story begins at the Black Pyramid. Now, Momra, you remember him from the last episode. Since his defeat last time, he does what any bad guy would do, find out what the Thundercats were up to, and so he does just that by looking inside of his cauldron. And, as I mentioned since episode 2, they're about to build their first fortress on the list, the Cat's Lair. So that's what Mumra saw first, the Thundercats at their campsite, building their first fortress. As for their leader Lino, unfortunately, he's busy exploring along with his companion Snarf. Of course, according to Mumra, he says that since Lino has his sword with him, well, that and his claw shield, it wouldn't be fair if the sword had accidentally broke and had the Thundercat fight themselves. So back at the Thundercats camp, well, good news for Panthro, he just finished the first vehicle on the list, the Thundertank. Now you can tell the Thunderkittens are very impressed. Tigra, on the other hand, seemed impressed as well, and he told Panthro, "I didn't think you would pull this off. Are you kidding me?" Panthro said. But then, all of a sudden, Tigra, Chitara, Panthro, and the kittens just heard something coming from the sky above. So Chitara wants to know, is this tank waterproof? But wait, it's raining something else that's more than water, but rocks as well. Of course, Wily Kit was hurt by that. So while Tigra and Chitara went for a place to hide, Panthro meanwhile hides in the Thunder Tank. In the meantime, the rock storm just kept getting worse and worse. Once the rock storm was over, good news from the Thunder Tank, it managed to survive intact, so it was the first to dig itself out. The next thing it did was to dig out the wrecked ship. Also, the good news, four of the Thundercats managed to survive, and thanks to the Thunder Tank, well, you could say it had passed the driving test with flying colors. So now that everybody made it out of the ship okay, Wally Kit wants to know, what's that storm all about? Where's it coming from? Well, all I can tell you is that Tiger says no ordinary storm, as far as I can tell. So back with Lionel and Snarf, they were busy exploring. So Snarf pleads his case to say, we're pretty much far away from the camp, from the Thundercats, that is. Well, you can always go back if you want, Lionel says. Nobody's ever forced you to come anyway. So Snarf says, gee, it's awfully spooky here. Then Lionel pleads his case to say, someday you'll be afraid of your own shadow, and wouldn't you know it? Lionel was proven right when Snarf was afraid of his own shadow. Then Snarf pleaded a case to say, if you're fierce like me, then you just have a fierce shadow. That's all. Well, long story short, thanks to Snarf who attacked the rhinoceros that came out of nowhere, that's when the rhino heads off. So Lionel wants to know what's going on with you. That rhino's twice the size as you. Oh, that thing doesn't faze me for a minute, Snarf says. And if you know what I'm talking about, then everything I see were not just shells in imagination. Then Lionel says, I wouldn't doubt at least for a minute, not even for a second. Well, Lionel was about to plead a case with Snarf. That was until he spotted one of those traps in the ground, and he fell in it. Well, luckily Lionel's okay, but now here's a problem. He can't get out because most of the sides in the ground are too slippery. So Snarf says, don't worry, Lionel, I'll get you out of here. So back with Snarf, good news for him, he found the vines from the nearby tree. So all he has to do is just use it and get Lionel out of the trap that's in the ground. Now that Snarf had got the vines, good news for him, he gave Lionel the vine and he told him, let me pull you up. So that's what Snarf did. So Snarf tried all his might to pull and pull and pull to get Lionel out of the trap in the ground, but then all of a sudden, long story short, something or someone just tied up Snarf out of nowhere. But wait, Snarf's not the only one who got tied up. Something or someone just tied up Lionel too, and it got him out of the hole. So after Lionel was pulled out, and that's when he thought it was Snarf who pulled him out. But wait a minute, that's not Snarf. He was surrounded by a bunch of creatures that just pulled him out. They're the rare Berbils, by the way. And they're the ones who pulled out Lionel and tied up Snarf. So Lionel told the Berbils to release him at once, and then he introduced himself. Then Lionel got upset because the Berbils were mocking at him. And I guess you could say Lionel doesn't like it a bit. And of course, Snarf pleaded his case to say, I guess these guys never heard of us. So what the Berbils did is that they're using hand gestures to show Lionel what Lionel knew, that he and his friends came from the sky and then they crashed, just like they did 2 episodes ago. So now that the Berbils know what was going on, they took Lionel and Snarf. Although curious, Lionel wants to know from himself, where are the Berbils taking both Lionel and Snarf? So later at the Thundercat camp, Tutara wants to know if Lionel's okay. I'm sure he's fine, Tigress says, and then he pleaded his case to say if Lionel was in trouble, then he would have contacted them by now. Now Panthro, who agrees with Tigra, told Chitara that if that's so, that there was no need for concern. Back with Lionel and Snarf, who were all tied up earlier by the Berbils, and now they're being tied to the stakes. Well, the problem with Lionel was that he couldn't answer his sword right now because he's all tied up. Then, before you know it, the Berbils leader soon stepped out from the group of Berbils. His name is Berbils, and he just stepped out in front of Lionel and Snarf. So Berbils, the leader of the Berbils, agreed to set free both Lionel and Snarf. And what he did next, along with the rest of the Berbils, is to lead them straight to the Berbil village that's right nearby. So meanwhile, at the Berbil village, Lionel and Snarf, along with Rover Bill and the rest of the Berbils, arrived straight there at their home. And by the time that they did, that's when Rover Bell came out, and then Rover Bill introduced her to both Lionel and Snarf. Rover Bell, that's the female Burble by the way, has come out with a tray full of food for both Lionel and Snarf. But Snarf interrupted him before he could try it out. He wanted to make sure that it's safe, and so Snarf ate it. So after Rover Bill had introduced himself, he was more than happy to show Snarf and Lionel where the fruit was picked from. But then the Berbils suddenly got attacked by a bunch of Trollocs. So after the alarm went off, most of the Berbils went to defend themselves with their blowguns. While that's going on, Bill, the leader of the Berbils, just told Lionel and Snarf that the Trollocs lived in the mountains up north from there, and they always raid the village for their fruit, the Berbil fruits, that is. So Lionel didn't hesitate to help the Berbils. So in the meantime, the Roverbills are attacking the Trollocs with every blowgun there is. But it didn't happen. None of the blowguns can affect the Trollocs whatsoever. At first, Roverbill, the leader of the Berbils, didn't want Lionel involved in it. But Lionel says that they needed help anyway because those blowguns are not working at all. Of course they don't, Roverbill said. Then Bill explained to Lionel of why these blowguns should be used in any way, because according to him, the Berbils didn't want anybody harmed in any way. Then Lionel made a suggestion to Bill, the leader of the Berbils, to let the Trollocs march into their village and take the fruit that they need. Then Bill says that even if they did, they would act like cowards anyway. Then what Lionel saw next was shocking. The Berbils are backing up. Well, Bill explained that they always do that. Then Lionel says, let me get this straight. We're just going to let this happen while we stand here and do nothing, and we won't do anything about it? Then Bill pleaded his case to say there's nothing else we could do. Then Lionel says, no, I won't allow this. So what does he do? He does what any good guy would do. Decides to step in and take action and help the Berbils. Also, as any good guy would do, he'll use his sword. Now, back with the Trollocs, after they saw what had happened, they began running off. So after Lionel did his good deed, the Berbils were amazed. Roberbill, the leader of the Berbils, appreciated Lionel's assistance. So Lionel wants to know from Roberbill, the leader of the Berbils, by asking a question. You're not upset with me, are you? Then Lionel apologized for losing control back there. Roberbill, the leader of the Berbils, says that he's not exactly upset, but he said he was more than glad to see that he and his Berbils are not exactly hurt. Well, the way I look at it, Lionel says, at least there's good news. The Trilogs won't be bothering you anymore. So even though Robert Bill agrees with Lionel, then Lionel wants to know what's going on with them. Don't you feel sorry for them? Then Robert Bill just let slip in front of Lionel that the reason why the Trollocs are raiding the village is because they're not doing it for themselves. They're doing it for the giant dentors that also live nearby, above the Trollocs, of course. And what happened is that the Trollocs were refused by the Gigantors by getting their berry bushes from the mountains. Robert Bill also says that unless the Burble fruit was given to the Gigantors, the Trollocs won't be allowed to get the bushes from the mountains from the Gigantors. Now here comes a problem. Since the Gigantors were upset with the Trollocs for not bringing the Burble fruits, so it's now up to the Gigantors to do what the Trollocs failed to do. Then suddenly, Lionel's sword just told him that there's something going on. So just like what any good guy would do, he looked through the sword's eye to tell him what's going on. Then while looking through the sword's eye, Lionel soon realizes that what Robert Bill said was true. The giant horse are coming to the village. Then Lionel suggested that since he had handled the Trilogs, he should have no problem handling the giant horse himself. But Snarf told Lionel, no way, bad idea. Then he suggested to Lionel that the Thundercats should be handling it. So finally, Lionel agrees with Snarf to say, well, okay, let's do this. So just like what any good guy would do, Lionel calls his friends the Thundercats. With his sword, of course. The Berbils were amazed and in shock. So back at the Thundercats camp, the Thundercats who saw the Thundercat signal went to the Burble village. With the Thundertank, of course. But in the meantime, Snarf was getting worried and then asked the question, what if they didn't see it? Then Lionel told Snarf that there's no need to worry about that right now. Anyway, the giant Dentors was about to attack Lionel and Snarf. That was when out of nowhere Tigress shows up first, and then Chitara and Panthro, and also the Thunder Kittens. So after the Thundercats had battled the giant Dentors, and just like what the Trollocs did, the giant Tors were defeated and then they ran off. Then the Thundercats were introduced to the Berbils. And yep, you've heard right. They now became their first friends, the Berbils, that is. So later at the Black Pyramid's tomb chamber, Mumra, the baddest of the bad, had just found out that the Thundercats had made their first friends, the Berbils. Well, not only that, Mumra pleaded himself a case that the Berbils had endless food supply. And then he said to himself that he cannot allow that to happen. So just like what any bad guy would do, he transformed himself into a locust. Well, not just a locust, but many swarms full of it, and he heads towards the Burble village. So meanwhile there, back at the Burble village, Roberbill, the leader of the Berbils, had thanked the Thundercats for helping out. And of course, the Thundercats did the same. And of course, Lionel pleaded his case to say, friends help each other. But then suddenly, out of nowhere, there were locusts everywhere that was swarming the village. But not really. It was Mumra in disguise. So as the Berbils tries to fend off the giant locusts that they'd never seen before, so Lionel told Roberbill, the leader of the Berbils, that there's something awfully familiar about it. The swarm itself, to say the least. So Lionel went ahead and jumped on the locust's back. Now that Lionel's on top of the locust, which is really Mumra in disguise, they both went flying in the air. And then they saw a volcano up ahead. So both Lionel and the Locust, which was really Mumra, head straight there. But then the Locust soon disappeared, and Lionel fell right into the volcano. Things looked pretty bad for him. Of course, Lionel's not the only one that's falling because the sword flew out of his claw shield. And just when things were looking hopeless, that's when Jaga's spirit appeared and told Lionel, call for the sword and hurry. And so Lionel did. So now with the sword in Lionel's hands, and not a moment too soon, both Lionel and the sword flew right out of the volcano. So good news, both Lionel and the sword made it out. As for Murmur, who was the locust in disguise, went back to the Black Pyramid's tomb chamber. So meanwhile there, so when Mumra changed back to his mummified form, even though he failed to destroy Lino, he said to himself that he must do better next time. And so Mumra went ahead and went to rest in his sarcophagus. Meanwhile, at the Thundercats camp, when Lionel finally came back to join up with his friends, so Tigra asked the question, what's taking you so long? I think it's a long story, Lionel said. Then minutes later, Roberbill, the leader of the Berbils, and the rest of the Berbils show up. Then Roberbill, the leader of the Berbils, said that he and the Berbils would like to welcome the Thundercats since they are now their neighbors. So Tiger goes first to thank the Berbils for bringing all the food. So Roberbill, the leader of the Berbils, looked at the blueprints of the cat's lair that the Thundercats wanted to build, and then asked the question, "You're going to build that?" "Of course we are," Tiger said. Then Roberbill, the leader of the Berbils, says, "Are you sure you're just going to build your home? Just the few of you?" "Well, it's going to take a while," Lionel said. Then the Roberbills had a thought that they shouldn't be building it alone. They will do it. So Tiger, after they heard it from Roberbill, the leader of the Berbils, saying that the Berbils should help the Thundercats build the cat's lair. So Tiger says, "Well, thank you, but," then said that there was no need to. Then Roberbill, the leader of the Berbils, says, "I thought you said we are friends. Friends do help each other." Lionel, who agrees with Roberbill, the leader of the Berbils, looked at Tiger and says, "You know something? He has a point there." So Tigra, after he agrees with Lionel to say that he agrees to let Roberbill and the Berbils build the cat's lair. So both Lionel and Roberbill, the leader of the Berbils, shook hands. And then long story short, they all have dinner together. So yep, you've heard right. Thundercats just meet their first friends. And so that ends episode 3.